When my wife passed away, my son sold my house without my permission. When I confronted him, he threw my bags in the street and shouted, "You poor old man, go find a nursing home to live in." He didn't know I was the owner of the real estate agency that bought the house. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought the worst betrayal of my life would come from my own son, especially just 3 weeks after burying my Martha. The rain was beating against the kitchen window that Tuesday morning when I found the real estate documents scattered across the dining table. My hands shook as I picked up the sale agreement, the ink still fresh, the signatures already dried. Our house, the home Martha and I had shared for 35 years, had been sold without my knowledge, without my consent. "Jason," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. The sound echoed through the empty hallways where Martha's laughter used to fill every corner. My son appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas at 11 in the morning, his hair disheveled and his eyes avoiding mine. At 33, Jason had never quite figured out how to stand on his own 2 feet, always relying on Martha's gentle nature and my reluctant support to bail him out of whatever mess he'd created. "What is this?" I held up the papers, my 61-year-old heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Jason straightened his shoulders, trying to project a confidence he'd never earned. "It's exactly what it looks like, Dad. I sold the house." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into Martha's favorite chair, the one where she used to sit every evening, reading her romance novels and humming softly to herself. "You sold our house? Without telling me?" "Your house," Jason scoffed, crossing his arms. "Mom's been gone for 3 weeks. You can't afford this place on your maintenance worker salary. I saved you from foreclosure." I stared at him, searching for any trace of the little boy I used to take fishing, the one who used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms. That child was nowhere to be found in the cold stranger standing before me. "This was your mother's home," I whispered. "Every room has her memory in it, the garden she planted, the wallpaper she chose, the memories don't pay bills," Jason cut me off. "Look, I already found you a nice senior community. It's called Sunset Manor. They have activities, other old people to talk to. You'll love it." The casual cruelty in his voice made my stomach turn. "A senior community? Jason, I'm 61, not 91. "Same difference," he shrugged. "The new owners take possession next Monday. I suggest you start packing." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. "And where exactly do you think I'm going to live until then?" "That's not really my problem anymore." Jason pulled out his phone, already dismissing me. "Maybe call one of your drinking buddies from the maintenance crew. I'm sure someone has a couch you can crash on." The words felt like ice water in my veins. This was my son, the boy Martha had loved more than her own life, talking to me like I was some stranger who'd overstayed his welcome. "Jason, please, can we just sit down and talk about this? There has to be another way." "There is no other way," his voice exploded through the room. "You want to know the truth, Dad? I'm tired of pretending, tired of acting like I care about some old man who never amounted to anything. Mom's gone now, so I don't have to keep up the act anymore." Each word was like a knife twisting deeper. "The act?" "Yeah, the act. Pretending like I respected you, pretending like I didn't see how Mom had to work 2 jobs just to keep this place afloat while you pushed mops for minimum wage. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to tell my friends what my father did for a living?" I felt something breaking inside my chest, something that had nothing to do with my aging heart. "Your mother never worked 2 jobs. She worked part-time at the library because she loved books, not because we needed the money. Whatever helps you sleep at night." Jason walked toward the front door, grabbing his keys from the hook. "I've got somewhere to be. Your stuff better be out of here by Sunday, or I'll have it removed." "Jason, wait." But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him with a finality that echoed through the suddenly too quiet house. I stood there in the living room, surrounded by 35 years of memories, feeling more alone than I had even in those first dark days after Martha's funeral. The silence was deafening. No more of Martha's gentle humming from the kitchen. No more of her soft footsteps on the hardwood floors. Just the ticking of the grandfather clock we'd bought for our 10th anniversary and the distant sound of traffic outside. I walked to the mantelpiece where our wedding photo sat in its silver frame. Martha's radiant smile looked back at me, her eyes sparkling with the same joy I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. She'd been wearing her grandmother's pearls that day, the ones Jason had always promised would stay in the family. My fingers traced the edge of the frame as tears I'd been holding back for weeks finally started to fall. "I'm sorry, honey," I whispered to her picture. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect our home." The next few days passed in a blur of packing boxes and making phone calls. I tried reaching Jason multiple times, but every call went straight to voicemail. I even drove to his apartment across town, but his roommate claimed he wasn't there. By Sunday evening, I had managed to pack most of my belongings into a dozen cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. I'd arranged for a storage unit to hold Martha's furniture and the larger items I couldn't bear to part with. The rest I donated to charity, knowing Martha would have wanted them to help someone in need. As I loaded the last box into my old pickup truck, Mrs. Henderson from next door came over with a plate of cookies wrapped in aluminum foil. "Scott, honey, I'm so sorry about all this," she said, her voice thick with sympathy. "If there's anything Harold and I can do—" I managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You've been a good neighbor all these years." "Oh, where will you go?" I honestly didn't know. I'd called a few hotels, but most of them were either too expensive or booked solid. "I'll figure something out." She squeezed my arm gently. "Martha was lucky to have you, Scott. Don't let anyone tell you different." As I drove away from the house that had been my entire world, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. The "For Sale" sign now had a bright red "Sold" banner across it, fluttering in the evening breeze like a flag of surrender. I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do next. All I knew was that my son had stripped away everything I had left of the woman I'd loved more than life itself, and I felt more lost and broken than I ever thought possible. The roadside inn wasn't much to look at, but it was clean and affordable, and the elderly clerk behind the desk didn't ask too many questions when I checked in with just 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Room 207 smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet, but it had a bed, a small table, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. I set my suitcases down and sat heavily on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in my hands. For the first time in 3 days, I allowed myself to really think about what Jason had done. Not just the selling of the house, but the cold calculation behind it. The paperwork had been prepared weeks in advance. He'd been planning this while Martha was still fighting for her life in the hospital. I opened my wallet and pulled out a business card I'd carried for over 20 years, so worn the edges were soft and the gold lettering had faded. Scott Morrison, founder and CEO, Pinnacle Realty Group. My own business card, the one I'd never had the courage to show my son. I'd started Pinnacle Realty when Jason was just 8 years old, right after I lost my job at the manufacturing plant. Martha had been pregnant with what would have been our second child, but we lost the baby at 6 months. The grief and financial pressure had nearly destroyed us, but somehow we'd found a way to rebuild. I started small, buying distressed properties, fixing them up with my own hands and reselling them. Martha helped with the paperwork and the books, working late into the night at our kitchen table while Jason slept upstairs. Within 5 years, I had a small team. Within 10, I owned the largest real estate company in the Tri-County area. But I'd made a decision early on to keep my success hidden from Jason. I'd seen too many wealthy parents raise entitled children who never learned the value of hard work. So I maintained the fiction that I was just a maintenance worker, living modestly while secretly building an empire. Martha had understood. She'd even supported the decision, especially after we watched Jason's best friend turn into a spoiled brat when his father's tech company went public. We agreed that Jason would learn about the business when he was mature enough to handle it responsibly. We'd been waiting for that maturity for 25 years. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Pinnacle Realty. This is Diana." "Diana, it's Scott. Mr. Morrison. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. How are you holding up?" Diana had been my assistant for 12 years. She was one of only 3 people who knew I was taking time off to grieve, rather than simply being an absent boss. "I'm managing," I said. which wasn't entirely true. "Diana, I need you to pull a file for me, a recent sale. 317 Oak Street." I heard the sound of typing on her computer. "Oak Street, yes, here it is. Sold last Friday to Pinnacle Acquisitions for $230,000. The seller was Jason Morrison, relation to you." My jaw clenched. "He's my son." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Mr. Morrison?" I had no idea. The paperwork came through Rebecca in Acquisitions. She said it was a standard estate sale. "It wasn't an estate sale," I said quietly. "He sold it without my knowledge." "Oh my God." Diana's voice dropped to a whisper. "What do you want me to do?" I stared out the hotel window at the parking lot where my old pickup truck sat among the newer cars of business travelers and families on vacation. "Pull all the documentation. I want to see exactly how this went down." "Right away, sir. Should I notify Rebecca?" "Not yet. And Diana, keep this between us for now." After I hung up, I lay back on the hotel bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jason had sold my house to my own company. In his eagerness to get rid of his poor old father, he'd essentially sold the property to me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the price. Diana had said $230,000. I knew that house was worth at least $400,000 in the current market. Jason had taken a massive loss just to get rid of it quickly. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dad, hope you found somewhere to sleep. Don't expect me to check on you. Time to learn some independence. Jay." I stared at the message, feeling a mixture of pain and something else I couldn't quite identify. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Clarity. For 33 years, I'd made excuses for Jason's behavior. When he'd been arrested for shoplifting in high school, I'd told myself he was just acting out because of peer pressure. When he'd dropped out of college twice, I'd convinced myself he was just finding his path. When he'd borrowed money from Martha and never paid it back, I'd rationalized that family helps family. But sitting in that hotel room, holding his cruel message, I finally saw the truth. Jason wasn't lost or confused or going through a difficult phase. He was exactly who he'd chosen to be, a man who saw other people, even his own father, as resources to be exploited and discarded when no longer useful. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Rebecca from Acquisitions. She picked up on the second ring. "Rebecca, this is Scott Morrison." "Mr. Morrison?" She sounded surprised. "I thought you were taking extended leave." "I am, but I need to ask you about a recent acquisition. 317 Oak Street." "Oh yes, that was an interesting case. The seller seemed very eager to close quickly. Didn't even negotiate when we offered below market value. Honestly, it felt almost too easy." "Tell me about the seller." "Jason Morrison. Claimed to be settling his deceased mother's estate. He had all the paperwork in order, power of attorney, death certificate, the works. We verified everything with the county records office." I closed my eyes. "What kind of power of attorney?" "Financial power of attorney dated 6 months ago. Signed by both parents, witnessed and notarized. It gave him full authority to handle all financial matters in case of incapacitation or death." The document Martha had insisted on signing when her cancer diagnosis came back. She'd been so worried about me having to handle everything alone if something happened to her. We'd both signed identical papers, giving each other and Jason emergency authority over our affairs. Neither of us had imagined he'd use it to steal from me, while I was still very much alive and capable. "Rebecca, I need you to hold off on any further processing of that sale." "Is there a problem, sir?" "You could say that." I stood up and walked to the window, watching the sun set over the parking lot. The house belonged to both parents. The seller only had authority to act for his deceased mother, not for his very much alive father. I could hear Rebecca's sharp intake of breath. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying Jason Morrison committed fraud, and I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what that means." For the first time since Martha's funeral, I felt something other than grief and exhaustion. I felt purpose. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The grief was still there, sitting heavy in my chest like a stone, but it was no longer the only thing I could feel. There was something else now: determination. After a quick shower and coffee from the hotel's lobby, I drove to the Pinnacle Realty offices for the first time since Martha's funeral. The building was a testament to everything I'd built over the past 23 years. 4 stories of glass and steel in the heart of downtown, with my company's name etched in gold letters across the front entrance. I used my private elevator to reach the executive floor, avoiding the main reception area where employees might ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Diana was already at her desk, a stack of files waiting for me. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," she said softly. "I have everything you requested." I settled into my office chair and opened the first file. The documentation was thorough, as always. Jason had presented himself as the sole heir to Martha's estate, using the power of attorney documents to authorize the sale. But there was something else in the file that made my blood run cold. "Diana, this appraisal report, when was it commissioned?" She checked her notes. 2 weeks before the sale. "But that's not the unusual part, sir. Look at page 3. I flipped to the indicated page and found myself staring at a photograph of the interior of my own home, but it wasn't recent. The furniture was different, arranged in a way Martha had stopped using years ago. The wallpaper in the background was the old pattern we'd replaced 5 years earlier. "These photos are old," I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. "At least 5 years old, staged," Diana confirmed, which means the appraisal was deliberately based on outdated information. The current value should have been much higher. I set the file down and leaned back in my chair. "He planned this years ago." "It appears so, sir, but there's more." Diana handed me another folder. "I did some research on your son's financial situation. With your permission, I'd like to show you what I found." I nodded, bracing myself for whatever new betrayal was coming. Jason Morrison owes approximately $87,000 to various creditors. Credit cards, personal loans, and, she hesitated, a significant gambling debt to some very unsavory people. The room felt like it was spinning. Gambling debt? Underground poker games, according to my source. He's been playing for years, but the debts got serious about 6 months ago. Around the same time, he started asking about estate planning documents. 6 months ago, right when Martha's cancer had returned and we'd signed those power of attorney papers. The timing wasn't a coincidence. How much does he owe for gambling? $50,000 to people who don't accept late payments. I stared out my office window at the city below. All those years I'd worried about spoiling Jason with too much money, and he'd been slowly destroying himself with debt instead. The irony was bitter. "There's something else," Diana said quietly. "He's been making inquiries about your net worth, specifically asking around about whether you own any property or have any significant assets." "Who has he been asking?" "Some of your former co-workers from the maintenance company. He's been telling people that he's worried about his poor old father's financial security, playing the concerned son." I felt a surge of anger so intense it surprised me, not just at Jason's deception, but at my own naivety. All this time, while I'd been protecting him from the knowledge of our wealth, he'd been investigating me like a potential mark. "Diana, I want you to do something for me. Call Rebecca and tell her we need to put the Oak Street property into legal review. Some irregularities have come to light that need investigation." "That will freeze the sale, sir." "Exactly." I stood up and walked to the window. "How long can we drag out a legal review?" "As long as necessary, especially if we discover evidence of fraud." "Good. Now, I need you to contact Jason and schedule a meeting. Tell him there are problems with the sale paperwork and he needs to come in to resolve them." Diana made a note. "What should I tell him about who he's meeting with?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Tell him he's meeting with the senior acquisitions manager to discuss some irregularities with the estate documentation. Don't mention my name." After Diana left to make the arrangements, I sat alone in my office thinking about the boy Jason used to be. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway of the house he'd just sold. I remembered the pride in his eyes when he'd brought home his first A on a math test. I remembered how he'd cried when our dog Rex had died, and how Martha and I had held him until he fell asleep. Where had that boy gone? When had he become someone who could look at his grieving father and see only an obstacle to overcome? My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. He sounded nervous, but agreed to come in. I spent the rest of the day reviewing Jason's file and planning exactly how I wanted this confrontation to unfold. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about 25 years of lies and manipulation, about a son who had pretended to love his parents while secretly plotting to rob them. That evening, I drove past the house on Oak Street. There was a moving truck in the driveway and several workers carrying boxes into the garage. The new owners, my own company, were apparently wasting no time taking possession. I parked across the street and watched as they moved Martha's garden furniture, the pieces I'd built for her 10th anniversary. She'd spent countless hours in that garden, tending to her roses and talking to me about her day while I grilled dinner on the patio. A memory surfaced unbidden. Martha sitting in her favorite garden chair last spring, weak from chemotherapy, but determined to see her flowers bloom one more time. She'd made me promise to take care of the garden after she was gone, to keep her roses alive. Jason had sold her roses along with everything else. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Jason's name appeared on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello, Jason." "Dad, hi." His voice sounded strained, artificial. "I heard you had to meet with some real estate people tomorrow about the house sale." So Diana had managed to reach him. "That's right. Is everything okay? I mean, the sale went through, right?" I could hear the panic barely concealed beneath his casual tone. "There seemed to be some irregularities with the paperwork. Nothing I can't handle." "What kind of irregularities?" "I'm not entirely sure. The acquisitions manager wants to go over everything with both of us, make sure all the documentation is properly filed." There was a long pause. "Both of us?" "Well, you are the one who filed the sale paperwork. I assume they'll want to verify some details with you." "Right, of course." His voice was getting tighter. "What time is the meeting?" 2 o'clock tomorrow. Pinnacle Realty building downtown. Another pause. Pinnacle Realty, that's a pretty big company, isn't it? I smiled grimly. "One of the largest in the state, I believe." "And they're the ones who bought the house?" "Through one of their acquisition subsidiaries, yes." I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. He'd probably assumed he was dealing with some small-time investor, not a major real estate corporation with teams of lawyers and investigators. "Dad, maybe I should call a lawyer, just to be safe." "That's up to you, son, though I can't imagine why you'd need a lawyer if everything was done properly." The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll see you tomorrow." After he hung up, I sat in my truck for another hour, watching the workers finish loading Martha's belongings into storage containers. Tomorrow Jason would discover that his elaborate scheme had been built on a foundation of lies. Tomorrow he would learn that the father he'd dismissed as a poor maintenance worker controlled an empire worth more than he could have imagined. Tomorrow the real game would begin. But tonight I allowed myself to grieve, not just for Martha, but for the son I'd thought I knew, the son who had never really existed at all. I arrived at the office an hour early the next day, wanting everything to be perfect for what was about to unfold. Diana had prepared a conference room on the 3rd floor, neutral territory that wouldn't immediately reveal my position in the company. I wanted Jason to discover the truth gradually, layer by devastating layer. At exactly 2 o'clock, Diana escorted Jason into the conference room. I was already seated at the far end of the polished mahogany table, wearing a simple button-down shirt and khakis. The same kind of clothes I'd worn to every parent-teacher conference and school event for 33 years. Jason looked nervous, but was trying to hide it. He'd dressed up for the occasion, wearing what I recognized as his one good suit, the one Martha had bought him for job interviews he'd never quite managed to land. "Dad?" Jason looked confused as he entered the room. "What are you doing here?" "I was invited," I said simply, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please, sit down." Diana remained standing near the door. "Mr. Morrison, this is Jason Morrison, the seller we discussed. Jason, this is Scott Morrison, our senior consultant, handling the review of your transaction." I watched Jason's face carefully as the name registered. Morrison, the same last name. but it was such a common name that I could see him dismissing it as coincidence. "Thank you, Diana. That will be all for now." After she left, closing the door behind her, Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "So, what exactly is the problem with the sale?" I opened the file in front of me, taking my time to review the first page. "Well, Jason, it seems there are several irregularities that need to be addressed. First, let's talk about the power of attorney documents you used to authorize this sale. What about them? Everything was properly notarized and filed." "That's true. However, the power of attorney only gave you authority to act on behalf of your deceased mother, Martha Morrison. It didn't give you any authority over your father's half of the property." Jason's face went pale. "My father's half?" "Yes. According to the county records, the property was owned jointly by Martha Morrison and Scott Morrison as tenants by the entirety, which means both parties had to consent to any sale." I looked up from the file, meeting his eyes directly. "Your father never consented to this sale. But he's just a maintenance worker. He doesn't have any money. How could he own half of that house?" I kept my expression neutral. "What your father does for work is irrelevant. The legal ownership is what matters here. And legally, you only had the right to sell your mother's 50% interest in the property." Jason was starting to sweat now. I could see small beads of perspiration forming on his forehead, despite the air conditioning in the conference room. "This has to be some kind of mistake," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I've lived in that house my whole life. My father never said anything about owning it." "Many people don't discuss their financial arrangements with their children," I replied calmly. "But the deed doesn't lie. Would you like to see a copy?" I slid a document across the table. It was the original deed from 35 years ago, showing both Martha's and my name as equal owners. Jason stared at it for a long moment, his hands shaking slightly. "What does this mean for the sale?" "Well, that depends on several factors. Can you contact your father to get his consent for the sale?" Jason laughed bitterly. "My father and I aren't exactly on speaking terms right now." "Oh? What happened?" For a moment, Jason looked like he might actually tell the truth. Then his face hardened. "He's become difficult since my mother died. Unreasonable. He didn't understand that I was trying to help him by handling the estate matters." I nodded sympathetically. "That must be frustrating for you, especially given the financial pressures you're under." Jason's eyes snapped up to meet mine. "What financial pressures?" "Well, it's part of our standard background check for large transactions. We always verify that sellers aren't under undue financial duress that might affect the legitimacy of the sale." I opened another file. "It shows here that you have approximately $87,000 in outstanding debts. Is that accurate?" The color drained completely from Jason's face. "How do you know that?" "As I said, it's standard procedure. What concerns us is the timeline. These debts were accumulated over the past 6 months, which coincides with when you first started inquiring about estate planning documents. It raises questions about your motivations for the sale." Jason stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I'm simply trying to understand the situation so we can resolve it appropriately." I remained seated, keeping my voice calm and professional. "For instance, the gambling debts listed here. $50,000 owed to what our investigators describe as high-risk lenders. Were you planning to use the proceeds from this sale to pay those debts?" "That's none of your business." "Actually, it is our business. If this sale was conducted under financial duress, or if you misrepresented your authority to sell the property, it could void the entire transaction." Jason began pacing around the small conference room like a caged animal. "You can't void the sale. The paperwork is all legal. I had power of attorney for your mother's portion only," I reminded him. "And there's another issue we need to discuss, the appraisal report you provided." I opened yet another file, this one containing the photographs that had been used to establish the property's value. These interior photos are at least 5 years old. The actual condition and value of the property are significantly different from what's represented here. Jason stopped pacing and stared at the photographs. I could see him trying to calculate how much trouble he was in. This appears to be deliberate misrepresentation, I continued, using outdated photos to justify a below-market sale price. Combined with the lack of proper authority to sell the full property, it suggests a pattern of fraudulent behavior. Fraudulent? Jason's voice cracked on the word. I'm afraid so. The question now is how we proceed. Pinnacle Realty could simply void the sale and pursue legal action for fraud. Or, I paused, letting the word hang in the air. Or what? Or we could work together to find a solution that addresses everyone's concerns. But that would require full cooperation from you and your father. Jason slumped back into his chair, his head in his hands. My father hates me right now. There's no way he's going to cooperate with anything. What exactly did you do to make him hate you? For a moment I thought he might actually confess. His shoulders shook slightly, and I could see the weight of his actions finally hitting him. But then he looked up, and his expression hardened again. I told him the truth about his situation, that he couldn't afford to keep living in that house on his income. He didn't want to hear it. The casual cruelty of the lie took my breath away. Even now, even with his entire scheme unraveling around him, Jason couldn't bring himself to admit what he'd really done. I see, I said quietly. And where's your father living now? I don't know. Some hotel, I think. Like I said, we're not talking. I stared at him across the table, this stranger who shared my DNA but none of my values. This man who could throw his father out on the street and then claim it was for his own good. Jason, I said, my voice still calm, but with a new edge to it, I'm going to give you one chance to tell me the complete truth about what happened with your father. Because I promise you, if I find out you're lying to me about anything else, the consequences will be severe. He met my eyes for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options. Tell the truth and face judgment, or continue lying and hope he could talk his way out of it. He chose poorly. I already told you the truth. My father is a stubborn old man who couldn't handle reality. I did what was best for him, even if he was too proud to see it. I closed the files and folded my hands on the table. Very well. Given the irregularities we've discovered and your unwillingness to provide full disclosure, Pinnacle Realty will be freezing this transaction pending a complete legal review. You can't do that. Actually, we can, and we are. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The sale is void as of this moment. The property will be returned to its rightful owners once we locate Scott Morrison and obtain his statement about this transaction. But I need that money. The desperation in Jason's voice was raw and ugly. You don't understand. There are people who expect me to pay them back, dangerous people. I turned back to face him. Then I suggest you find another way to raise the funds, legally this time. Victor, Jason stared at me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Wait a minute. You said your name was Scott Morrison. That's my father's name. Yes, it is. And you work for the company that bought our house. I do. I could see the pieces starting to come together in his mind, but he wasn't quite there yet. He was still thinking too small, still unable to imagine that his poor maintenance worker father could be connected to a major real estate corporation in any meaningful way. Are you related to my father somehow? I walked back to the table and picked up my business card from the file, the same one I'd been carrying for 20 years. I slid it across the table to him. Jason picked it up and read it slowly. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, devastating comprehension. Founder and CEO, he whispered. I'm your father, Jason, and you just tried to steal my house. The business card fluttered from Jason's trembling fingers and landed on the polished conference table between us. For several long seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning and Jason's increasingly ragged breathing. That's not possible, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You're a maintenance worker. You push mops. You wear those ugly work shirts with your name embroidered on the pocket. I sat back down across from him, studying the face of the son I'd raised, but apparently never truly known. I did work maintenance, Jason. For the first 8 years of your life, that's exactly what I did. But I also started buying and renovating properties on the side. Your mother helped me with the paperwork every night after you went to bed. Jason shook his head violently, as if he could somehow deny the reality sitting in front of him. No, This is some kind of mistake, some coincidence. You can't be—" "I can prove it," I said quietly. I pulled out my phone and called Diana. "Please bring me the Morrison file from my office, the personal one." "Oh no." While we waited, Jason sat in stunned silence, his eyes darting between the business card and my face, as if he were trying to solve an impossible puzzle. When Diana arrived with a thick manila folder, I thanked her and waited until she left before opening it. "These are the incorporation papers from 1994, I said, sliding the first document across the table. "The year I officially founded Pinnacle Realty. You were 8 years old. Do you remember that summer when your mother and I were always having grown-up meetings in the kitchen after dinner?" Jason's hands shook as he picked up the incorporation papers. His name was listed as a minor beneficiary, with provisions for inheritance should anything happen to both Martha and me. "Here's the deed to our first commercial property," I continued, adding another document to the growing pile. "And here are the tax records showing the growth of the company over the past 23 years. Each document I placed in front of him was another nail in the coffin of his worldview. I watched his face cycle through denial, confusion, anger, and finally a dawning horror as he began to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. "The house," he said suddenly, his voice hoarse. "You said I sold your house to your own company." "Through Pinnacle Acquisitions, yes. One of 7 subsidiary companies I own." I leaned forward, my voice still calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Tell me, Jason, how does it feel to realize you tried to steal from someone who could buy and sell your entire world without blinking?" "I didn't know," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow. "How was I supposed to know? You never told me." "I never told you because I wanted you to learn the value of hard work. I wanted you to understand that respect and success have to be earned, not handed down like an inheritance." I paused, letting that sink in. I wanted to raise a son who would be worthy of inheriting what I'd built. Jason flinched as if I'd slapped him. "And instead you raised a disappointment." "No, Jason, I raised a son. You chose to become a disappointment." The words hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. Jason's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by something harder and more desperate. "The gambling debts," he said suddenly. "Dad, there are people who are going to hurt me if I don't pay them back. I owe $50,000 to some very bad people." "I know about the debts, Jason. I know about all of it." "Then you have to help me. You're my father. You have to—" "I don't have to do anything," I cut him off. "You made these choices. You accumulated these debts. You decided to try to steal from your own family instead of coming to me for help." "I tried to come to you." His voice rose to nearly a shout. "Do you think I wanted to sell the house? Do you think I wanted to throw you out? I was desperate." "When did you try to come to me?" Jason's mouth opened and closed several times before he finally looked away. I thought about it. "Ofa, thinking about asking for help isn't the same as actually asking, Jason. You would have said no anyway. You would have given me some lecture about responsibility and making my own way in the world." I studied his face, seeing not just the man he'd become, but the child he'd been. "Would I have?" "Of course you would have. That's what you always did. Every time I had a problem, every time I needed something, you made me figure it out myself." The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. I had been tough on Jason, perhaps too tough. I'd wanted him to be strong and independent, but maybe I'd gone too far in the other direction. "You're right," I said quietly. "I did expect you to solve your own problems, but there's a difference between expecting you to handle everyday challenges and abandoning you in a real crisis. If you had come to me and said you were in trouble, that you owed money to dangerous people, I would have helped you." "Really?" The skepticism in his voice was heartbreaking. "Really. But instead of trusting me, you decided to betray me. You forged documents, misrepresented the value of our home, and threw me out on the street like garbage. Then you told me I was nothing but a burden you didn't want to carry anymore." Jason winced with each accusation, but he didn't deny any of them. "The worst part," I continued, "isn't what you did to me. It's what you did to your mother's memory. That house was filled with 35 years of her love, her dreams, her presence. Every room held a piece of her soul, and you sold it all for gambling money. Don't, Jason whispered, his voice breaking. Don't bring Mom into this. She's already in this, Jason. She's been in this from the beginning. Do you know what your mother's last words to me were? He shook his head, tears starting to stream down his face. She made me promise to take care of you. She was worried about how you'd handle her death, worried that you'd make poor choices without her guidance. She made me swear that no matter what happened, I'd always be there for you. The silence that followed was deafening. Jason buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I kept that promise, I said softly. Even when you threw me out of my own home, even when you called me worthless, I kept looking for ways to help you. Do you want to know how? Jason looked up, his eyes red and swollen. I could have had you arrested the moment I discovered what you'd done. Fraud, elder abuse, theft. You'd be looking at serious prison time. Instead, I arranged this meeting to give you a chance to make things right. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the city I'd spent decades building my business in. I want you to tell me the truth about everything. I want you to acknowledge what you did and why you did it, and then I want you to decide who you want to be going forward. I don't understand. I turned back to face him. You have two choices, Jason. You can continue being the man who throws his father out on the street and steals his mother's memory for gambling money. Or you can start becoming the man your mother believed you could be. And if I choose the second option, then we work together to solve your problems. I pay off your debts, you get help for your gambling addiction, and you earn back the right to call yourself my son. And if I choose the first option? I met his eyes directly, making sure he understood the gravity of what I was about to say. Then I press charges for fraud and elder abuse. You go to prison, and I never see you again. Jason stared at me for a long moment, processing the ultimatum. That's not really a choice. Of course it is. It's the choice between easy and right, between selfishness and responsibility, between the man you've been and the man you could become. I paused. It's the choice your mother trusted you to make. For several minutes, Jason sat in silence, staring at the business card on the table. I could see him wrestling with something internal, some fundamental decision about who he wanted to be. Finally, he looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes for years, genuine remorse. Dad, he said, his voice shaking, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. It was a start, but I needed to know it was real. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the house on Oak Street, watching the morning sun stream through the windows Martha had chosen so carefully all those years ago. The familiar sounds of home surrounded me, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the whisper of wind through the oak tree in the backyard. But something was different now. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in years, maybe decades. There was no underlying tension, no walking on eggshells, no constant worry about what crisis Jason might create next. The legal process of reclaiming the property had been surprisingly straightforward once I'd presented the evidence of fraud to the district attorney. Jason had cooperated fully, providing detailed confessions about how he'd planned and executed the scheme. His willingness to take responsibility had been the first step toward rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a father-son relationship. He was currently 3 months into a court-mandated gambling addiction program and working his first honest job in years as an entry-level property inspector for Pinnacle Realty. I'd insisted he start at the bottom, earning minimum wage like any other new employee. He was living in a modest apartment across town and attending weekly counseling sessions to address what the therapist called entitlement issues and emotional immaturity. It wasn't the relationship I'd once dreamed of having with my son, but it was honest. And after 33 years of lies and manipulation, honesty felt like a precious gift. I walked through the house slowly, remembering the living room where Martha used to curl up with her books on rainy afternoons, the dining room where we'd hosted countless family dinners back when Jason still came home for holidays, The kitchen where she'd taught me to cook her grandmother's recipes, laughing at my clumsy attempts to knead bread dough. But as I moved through these memory-filled spaces, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't want to live here anymore. This house belonged to Martha and me together. Without her presence filling the rooms with laughter and warmth, it felt more like a museum than a home. I loved it. I would always treasure the memories it held, but it wasn't where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. The decision had been growing in my mind for weeks, ever since I'd had the locks changed and officially reclaimed possession. I could maintain this house as a shrine to the past, or I could honor Martha's memory by moving forward with my life. I knew what she would have wanted me to choose. That afternoon, I called Diana and asked her to arrange a meeting with Rebecca from our acquisitions department. When she arrived at the house an hour later, I was sitting on the front porch, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. "Mr. Morrison," Rebecca said, climbing the porch steps with a curious expression. "Diana said you wanted to discuss something urgent?" "I want to sell this house," I said simply. Rebecca blinked in surprise. "Sir, but you just went through all that legal trouble to get it back." "I did, and now I want to sell it properly this time. Fair market value, legitimate buyer, clean transaction." "May I ask why?" I gestured to the empty rocking chair beside me, the one where Martha used to sit every evening, watching the neighborhood children play in the street. This house was perfect for the life I had with my wife, but that life is over now, and I need to build a new one. Rebecca nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Do you have any specific requirements for the buyer?" "Just one. I want it to go to a young family. Someone who will fill these rooms with laughter again, who'll plant new flowers in Martha's garden, and make new memories in these walls." 2 weeks later, I signed the sale papers in the same conference room where I'd confronted Jason. The buyers were a couple in their early 30s with twin 2-year-old daughters. When they'd toured the house, I'd watched their faces light up as they imagined their girls playing in the backyard, learning to ride bikes in the driveway, growing up surrounded by the love that Martha and I had built into every corner of that home. The sale price was fair, $420,000, nearly double what Jason had tried to steal it for. But the money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was knowing that the house would once again be filled with the kind of joy Martha had always believed it deserved. With the sale complete, I turned my attention to the next chapter of my life. I'd been thinking about retirement for years, but had always put it off because I couldn't imagine what I'd do with myself. Now, suddenly, I could see possibilities I'd never considered before. I found a smaller house on the other side of town, a comfortable ranch-style home with a modest garden and a view of the lake where Martha and I used to take weekend walks. It was peaceful without being isolated, close enough to my office that I could still oversee Pinnacle Realty, but far enough from the old neighborhood that I wouldn't be constantly haunted by memories. The process of downsizing forced me to confront 35 years of accumulated possessions. I kept the things that mattered: Martha's jewelry, our wedding album, the quilt her grandmother had made, the wooden rocking chair where she'd nursed Jason as a baby. Everything else I either donated or gave away. The rocking chair was the hardest decision. It held so many memories of Martha singing lullabies, reading bedtime stories, comforting a sick child. But in the end, I decided to give it to Jason. He cried when I brought it to his apartment. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen so many times before, but genuine emotion at being trusted with something so precious. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" he asked, running his fingers along the smooth wooden armrests. "This was Mom's favorite chair." "It was," I agreed. "And someday, when you're ready, when you've proven that you can be the man she believed you could become, maybe you'll have a family of your own to use it with." It was the closest thing to forgiveness I was ready to offer, and Jason understood that. He didn't ask for more than I was prepared to give. On my first night in the new house, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jason. "Started my second month of counseling today. The therapist says I'm making progress. Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled and typed back, "Your mother never gave up on you." I'm just keeping my promise to her. A few minutes later, another message. I love you, Dad. I know I don't deserve to say that after everything I've done, but I wanted you to know. I stared at the words for a long time before responding. Love isn't something you have to deserve, Jason. It's something you choose to honor. Keep working on becoming someone who honors it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a broken man, betrayed by the son I'd spent my life protecting, homeless and heartbroken in a cheap hotel room. Tonight, I was free. Free from the burden of pretending Jason was someone he wasn't. Free from the exhausting cycle of enabling his destructive behavior. Free from the fear that I was somehow failing as a father because I couldn't fix his problems for him. I'd learned something valuable in those dark weeks after Martha's death. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. Not abandoning someone, but refusing to participate in their self-destruction. Setting boundaries that protect your own peace while still leaving the door open for genuine redemption. Jason might choose to walk through that door someday, or he might not. That was his decision to make, but either way, I would be okay. I had honored my promise to Martha by giving him every chance to choose better. Now I could honor my promise to myself by choosing the life I wanted to live with whatever time I had left. The lake stretched out before me in the moonlight, calm and eternal. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called out across the water, its voice clear and strong in the gathering darkness. I raised my glass in a silent toast to Martha, to the love we'd shared, to the home we'd built together, and to the future I was finally ready to embrace. Then I went inside to begin the rest of my life, carrying nothing but gratitude for the lessons learned and the freedom earned through one of the hardest chapters I'd ever had to write. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.